He has written a book. It's called Walk This Way. DMC, Aerosmith, and the song that changed American music forever, online or wherever books are sold, as we make way for the Washington Post national arts reporter and the author of Walk This Way, Geoff Edgers, who joins us on the program. Yeah, I stumbled upon the Rolling Stone podcast, and Jeff's there, and he's passionate, telling me
Shake your hand?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
They do that
yeah. Glad you could join. You don't need your headphones.
I don't?
No,
All right,
you
I
don't
can
need
hear
to.
you.
Yeah, you can hear me here. All right, the premise of the book is you're saying that this song, where you would not think that these two parties would get together to do this at the time that they did it, how did it change radio?
Well, and you know, some very smarty pants person at the New York Times referenced the book and the title and described it as hyperbole a little bit, but it actually is almost science how this changed everything. And I could tell you in 30 seconds, before Walk This Way, the Run DMC version, there was no Yo MTV Raps, In Living Color, Arsenio, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I found in the archives at Cornell an attempt in 1985 by Run DMC's publicists to get them on the Letterman show. And Letterman's people wrote back and said, sorry, it doesn't fit the format. Just a couple years later, you see Paul Schaefer premiering his solo record with Dion, Carole King, and Will Smith on the microphone. So I mean, that's my elevator pitch, but I've got the reporting to back it up. It is science, you know?
How did it come together? These two bands get together and record this?
Well, you've got Run DMC, which was the most successful rap group at the time, but still not like Starship.
They weren't mainstream.
No. You like Star? Yeah. So you got Run DMC, and they're being produced by Rick Rubin, who was not the Rick Rubin we know of now. He was not a very famous man. He did have a slightly bad beard, and he ate a lot of Chinese food, but he was not Rick Rubin yet. And then you've got Aerosmith on the other side. And right now they just opened their Las Vegas run, the 50th anniversary. But what we forget, but I don't forget because I'm from Boston and I was 15 then, is they were as low as you could get. They had just gotten back together again, but they were still on drugs. They'd put out this record, Done with Mirrors, which I loved, but it was a bomb. And the record company basically said, hey, come on in here, do this thing. Here's $8,000. So $8,000 is what got them to New York in March of 1986.
Which band needed it most at the time, though?
Well, I'd argue Aerosmith only because in the mythology of this whole thing, Aerosmith has been seen as like the White Knights, really, riding in and saving this young rap group when in fact, Run DMC was on the ascension. They had already had hits. And Aerosmith was really in terrible, terrible shape. And when you look at what happened afterward, Aerosmith then starts doing things like Dude Looks Like a Lady and Permanent Vacation and all those records that made them more popular than before. But at that point, they were in trouble.
Was there mutual respect when they collaborated?
No, there was not. That is another piece of the myth. And what I found from my reporting, and I talked to 100 people for this thing. Back in the day, people liked to pretend everybody loved each other. You know what I mean? Like you and I, we have a terrible rivalry and hatred, but we're being friendly here. And that's kind of what happened there. The difference is I found about 20 minutes of archival footage in the Viacom vaults, which nobody had seen, or some editor had seen it and cut it down to 90 seconds in '86. And you can see Run DMC and Aerosmith talking to each other, and they have no idea really what they each do. Run DMC didn't even know the song was called Walk This Way. They just knew the beat. To them, it was number 4 on Toys in the Attic.
So they would sample this, the beginning part of Aerosmith's Walk This Way.
Yeah.
They didn't get to the lyrics.
No, they hated the lyrics. I mean,
they didn't understand the lyrics.
No, and who does? I still don't. But they're very rap-like. But what they knew is boom, ch, boom, 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 ch. They knew that. And if you look on YouTube, which I do endlessly, you can find Grandmaster Flash, the pioneering DJ, using that sample in 1978. But if you're a DJ back then, if you got to the guitar, and God forbid, if you got to the vocal, you were a terrible DJ who would never be seen again.
But then what happens to Run DMC after this song hits?
Well, Run DMC, is it the song or is it just their own sort of problems? But basically, this is the most successful thing they'll ever do. They had sold millions of records in the past, but they sold like tens of millions. It's huge. But what ends up happening is, one, they start feuding with their record company and they sue them, and that puts them on the sidelines for 2 years. And 2 years in hip hop in 1986 is an eternity. So by the time they come back with Tougher Than Leather in 1988, they're already on the way down. I still think it's a good record, but it doesn't sell as well. And then eventually they just kind of fizzle out. Aerosmith, on the other hand, they clean up. I mean, I have this great nitty-gritty, I'm sorry, I love reporting, this great nitty-gritty thing where they actually clean up because of Walk This Way, because the management of Aerosmith had to get Tyler into a drug rehab facility, and they had to do an intervention before the morning got on too long. And they told him that the BBC wanted to talk to him about Walk This Way. And because of the time change, he needed to be at the offices super early. And so he shows up and he's like, who are all you people? And that actually cleans them up to come back.
If the collaboration doesn't happen, finish that sentence.
Well, on the good side, we probably don't have the Fat Boys and the Beach Boys doing Wipeout. Or Limp Bizkit, right? But I also don't know if we have Public Enemy getting as much, getting on Saturday Night Live. So, and that was powerful stuff.
NWA.
Yeah. Tribe Called Quest. I don't know if that stuff is in the mainstream, because you might know that radio people, believe it or not, they kind of follow the leader. And what happened is this song was played on mainstream rock radio. It was the first rap song that was played. WBCN in Boston played it first, and then everybody else followed. And without that, I mean, would it have...
Eventually it would have.
Would it have happened? It had to, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know when.
Best interview in the book was with who?
Best interview. I mean, best snippet might have been Grandmaster Flash telling me that he could tell which records would work as a sample by holding the vinyl up to the light and seeing how narrow the grooves were.
Oh, my God.
I don't even understand that, but it sounds amazing, right? But, the other thing, my guilty pleasure as an Aerosmith obsessive as a kid who saw them in 1984, 13 on their Back in the Saddle tour. They weren't really back in the saddle. There's this period from 79 to 85 that's missing in many histories. They put out a record. Joe Perry went out on tour. I talked to everybody you could find, and I built that nitty gritty. I mean, you've got Tyler and Perry at their lowest point, but still trying to make something. But you've got all this, there's an amazing story there that gets them there. I mean, the night before they recorded that song, they were playing a concert with Ted Nugent opening up. I mean, that's something to me.
First concert I saw was Aerosmith.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And
in Dayton, Hare Arena.
What year is that?
I think it's 73, 74, something like that.
Yeah, that would be a show.
Yeah. I also saw Joe Perry at Bogart's in Cincinnati with his solo project. He played down there as well. And, Bogart's was a small little concert venue.
So early 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing Joe Perry there. So I've grown up on Aerosmith and have great appreciation for Aerosmith. But there are times when you know that they've got it, and then there are other times when you go, these guys are on drugs. And some, the Stones wrote Exile on Main Street or performed Exile on Main Street on drugs, and the Beatles did all this, great stuff on drugs. I don't know if Aerosmith was great on drugs or not, but in their minds they probably thought, you got to get on drugs to put out great music here. They were probably high when they collaborated with Run DMC.
Oh, they were. let me tell you. But I mean, the reality is there's a point in all these careers. I mean, you hear it with Joe Walsh. After he cleaned up, he couldn't play for a while because he was terrified of playing sober. But there's a point in the 70s, like Rocks and Toys in the Attic and all that stuff, where the drugs and the chaos and all that stuff seems to work. And then there's a certain point where it comes to a grinding halt. Draw the line and Night in the Right. That's when it falls apart. And if I'm a record producer, I just try to keep the drugs flowing until that moment, and then I run, Did you get any response from these bands? Did anybody get upset with anything reported in this book? It is unclear. At a certain point, Aerosmith's management, said, I'd love, copies of the book. And so I sent 5 copies to them, but I've heard nothing. I mean, Steven Tyler has my number, and while I was reporting the book, he would hear of something I had talked to somebody else about I mean, I was in a fabric store with my children. I don't know if you spend a lot of time in fabric stores, but they're not places where you do a lot of talking on the phone. And I got this call, unknown number, and it was just a guy screaming at me, and he sounded like Buster Poindexter or something, you know? And it was Tyler, because he felt like I had asked someone a question that he found to be offensive, which is that Joe Perry and Brad Whitford, the guitarist in Aerosmith, when they were starting out, were not judged to be good enough to play lead on some of the songs, and their producer had brought in guitarists to play for them. Tyler was very offended by that. And he let me know. And I just said, Steven,
of all the things,
I'm in a fabric store. Can I call you back? And Run and D, you know, Daryl actually texted me this morning and said, I'm just back from Germany. I haven't read the book, but I'm going to read it. I have not heard from the Reverend Run. But Chuck D just tweeted an amazing picture with the book, which is almost worth writing a book itself.
The book is Walk This Way, Run DMC, Aerosmith, and the song that changed American music forever. And the author is Geoff Edgers from the Washington Post. Yeah, it was fascinating listen, because I love, you know, the passion you had behind this. And I'm thinking, all right, you got me. This changed radio. Maybe it's hyperbole, but it was a collaboration. When I'm uncomfortable watching the video when they collaborate. It just,
why? What is it?
It doesn't look like they're comfortable.
Because they're not.
Yeah, but and that's when I saw the book title and I heard you, I went, God, I go back to that video, and that really illuminates what I was watching, that they didn't know each other. I don't know if they respected each other, but it felt like they needed each other for whatever this was going to be. And who takes credit for the beginning part of Walk This Way?
You mean the drum beat?
Yes.
Well, I have an entire, this shows you how dysfunctional and functional Aerosmith is at the same time. I have an entire chapter on who created the beat, and I do not come to a conclusion. Now, you would think the drummer would get credit, Joey Kramer, but Steven Tyler, who's a drummer at heart, used to drum in the 60s, he says he did it. He remembers doing it in 1974 in Hawaii, while Joey Kramer remembers creating that in Framingham, Massachusetts, a little bit after that. Now, I mean, if you're still willing to fight about the beat that long after it occurred, it's amazing. See, that's the kind of weirdo nitty-gritty that I love discovering, you know?
And it takes away the doubt of, why would these guys ever fight with each other? If they're fighting over something like that, like just the minutia, I can't imagine what it would be like being around Steven Tyler all the time.
Yeah, you know, I met him in Boston, and I will say that I expected this sort of crazy man, and he was incredibly warm and connective. And he was just very, very conscious of his image and his place in the world, you know? And so I'm very curious about when that call comes to me, because he's going to call. And I don't know if he's going to be yelling or he's going to be praising me, because it's not an authorized book, but it's got everybody in it. So it's very honest. But I hope they'll respect that, you know, it's a road to how they got there, and it has to have, you know, the warts too.
Pick up the book. It's in bookstores, wherever books are sold. Walk This Way, Run DMC, Aerosmith, and the song that changed American music forever. Geoff, thank you for coming in. Great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Good
I
luck.
appreciate it.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.